Okay, last time we left off, we were solving this system of equations by using a matrix, and we had just decided that in order to make the two in the last row, the first two in the last row, into a zero, we can multiply the second row by -2 and add it to row 3. Okay, so let's see what happened, or let's see what we get when we do that. Now remember, the first row, oops, pardon me, it's not negative. The first row is not going to change. And it actually turns out that the second row is also not going to change. Okay? But we're going to multiply row 2 by -2 and add it to row 3 to get the new row 3. Okay, so let's start with the 0 here. Times -2 is 0. We add that to 0, we get 0. If we take 1 and multiply it by -2, that's -2. We add it to the +2 below it, and we get 0.
It takes 300.
Shh, sweetie. Now we're going to take -5/3, multiply it by -2, and add it to -4. So I'm thinking that I'm going to do that down below. -5/3 times -2 is 10/3, and I need to add that to a -4, right? So let's take 10/3 plus a -4, right? Well, that's 10/3 minus 12/3. That's going to be a -2/3.
Mars, a red planet. Boy, say that.
Anything you say, they can hear on the video. So -2/3. And then we're going to do the same thing with the last two here. We're going to take 2 times -5/3, right? So 2, let's see, where do we do that? Oh, did we just, yeah. 2 times, I'm sorry, -2, pardon me. We don't need to do that. We can do that in our heads. 2 times -2 is -4, and we add that to 2, we get a -2. All right, now where do we go from here? Okay, we've got this matrix that's getting close to what we want. Now the last one, not the last thing, but the next thing we're going to do is make the -2/3 into a 1. How do we do that? Well, why don't we multiply row 3 by -3/2, since -2/3 times -3/2 is 1, since it's reciprocal. Okay, so again, the first row we're not changing. The second row we're not changing, and the third row we're just multiplying by -3/2. 0 times -3/2 is 0 for both of these. -2/3 times -3/2 is a 1, and -2, stop it, -2 times, oh my goodness, times -2/3, right, is a +4/3. No, I'm sorry, I multiplied it by the wrong thing. Sorry, I got thrown off by that thing happening with my computer. It always does that. -3/2. So that becomes a +3. Okay? Now, it is possible to stop right here at this particular matrix, right? This one that I'm putting in the blue. And we now know, because of this last row, that z is equal to 3. And we could take that value, plug and back substitute it, and then to find y, and then back substitute the values of z and y to find x. And so this particular matrix has a name. We call it a row echelon form of our original matrix. But, and so you could do that, but I'm going to keep going until we get it into reduced row echelon form. So what that means is that these numbers, -5/3, 3, and -1, I want them to become zeros. Okay? All right. So we'll go ahead and start with the first one. What we want to make 0 is the -1 that's in row 1. Okay? All right. So we're going to make that 0. How do we do that? Well, looking at my matrix, yeah, I could multiply, I mean, I could add row 1 and row 2 together, right? And that would give me 0, replace row 1 there. So that's what we're going to do here. I forgot to write the little arrow and put the directions, so let's do that here. We're going to add row 1 and 2. Okay, and that's going to give us something here. Okay, so now the second and the third rows are not going to change. So let's go ahead and copy them down. But now I'm going to add the first and the second row to make a new row 1. Okay, well, 1 plus 0 is 1. Negative 1 plus 1 is 0. That's what I wanted. And 3 plus negative 5/3 ends up being 4/3. Okay. And then 4 plus 2 gives me 6. All right. So I've got that new matrix. Now what we want to do is make the negative 5/3 and the negative 4/3. I'm sorry, the positive 4/3. We want to make these 0. Yeah. I'll do them one at a time. The first thing we're going to do is multiply row 3 by 5/3 and add it to row 2 to get a new row 2. So we'll get rid of the negative 5/3 first. Okay. What that means is that since we're getting a new row 2, row 1 and 3 are going to stay the same. Okay. So I'm going to multiply row 3 by 5/3 and add it to row 2. So I multiply 0 by 5/3, that's 0, plus 0 still gives me 0. This 0 here multiplied by 5/3 is 0, plus 1 is still 1. 1 times 5/3 is 5/3, plus a negative 5/3 is 0. And 3 times 5/3 is 5. And if I add 5, I'm sorry, yeah, take 3 times 5/3, which is 5. And if I add 5 to 2, we get 7. Okay, very last step. We're going to get rid of the 4/3, make it a 0. Okay, and we're going to do almost exactly the same thing as we did just now. We're going to multiply row 3 by a negative 4/3 and add to row 1. Okay, to get the new row 1. Alright, so rows 2 and 3 are exactly how we want them. Okay, so if I multiply 3 times negative 4/3, multiply row 3. So if we multiply 0 times negative 4/3, that's 0, plus the 1 up here, that's 1. That's 1. If I take this 0 multiplied by negative 4/3, it's 0, plus the 0 here, that's still 0. If I take this 1 and multiply it by negative 4/3 and add it to 4/3, I get 0. Now I can take 6 and multiply it by negative 4/3. I get negative 24/3, which is negative 8. And if I add that to row 1, negative 8 plus 6, negative, row 3 times negative 4/3. I think am I supposed to get negative? Row 3 times negative 4/3 is negative 4. Oh yes, plus 6 is a 2. Okay, so this matrix is now in reduced row echelon form. And from it, I can just read out the answers. I can see that x is equal to 2, and that y is equal to 7, and that z is equal to 3. All right, so we're all done. This is most helpful for systems that are, 4 rows and 4 columns, or I'm sorry, 4 rows or 5 rows, and so on. Okay, so so you may not use it for 3 because you have those other methods, but it's good to practice, especially you're going to do it even more in your other calculus classes coming up.